Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction. So we turn now to the two sections in the 5th chapter of Mark dealing with the synagogue leader's daughter's death. His name, I believe it's pronounced Jairus, and his daughter is ill, and so he comes running to Jesus, asking him for help, and he immediately says yes, and then goes back to Jairus' house with him, and he does an odd thing where he tells the people that the child isn't dead, she's only asleep, and they are disdainful of that, but Jesus goes in, and just with the girl's father and mother and Peter, James, and John, he apparently raises her from the dead. And then that's the end of the story. So I'd like to think that what's going on here is an explanation, again, of how we can have a secure attachment with God. When Jairus comes to Jesus and falls down at his feet and says, "Please help my daughter," and immediately servants from his house come and say, "Oh, don't bother the teacher because your daughter has died," Jesus says what seems to be very trite on the face of it. He says, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Seems like a platitude that does not recognize the struggle in order to stand up to the constant stream of fear-mongering that is a common experience in life, and a platitude that does not recognize the depth of grief and turmoil that's within us when we are going through some difficult time. Yet, considering the source here, it's Jesus, I pause to consider what must be the more complex spiritual principle that Jesus is describing in this short motto or mantra. We are here considering how these stories must describe God's reach to us to connect with us as spiritual human beings, and how Jesus is modeling how we respond and welcome that connection with our Creator who loves us unconditionally. If I am Jairus, then these few words are intended to reach to a part of me represented by Jairus. Now, he was the most important church leader in the entire town. He would have been respected as a devout man, as a good businessman, taking care of the people in the synagogue. He would have been a devout man, and his family would have been devout. And his mission would have been the well-being of the synagogue and all its people. He would have been a defender of the faith and a defender of the synagogue against all threats, internal and external. Now, I have discovered that there's a part of me that is an extension of my perhaps more hidden ego that vocally defends my sense of self, my rightness, and nurtures my unique self in the world as I know it. Human beings are wired to defend themselves against all threats to their survival and their preservation. This is how the human race has continued to exist. So it's part of our nature, then, to make communities and to make babies. This nature, my premise, is the manifestation of our human spirit that is designed to love others, to spread our wisdom, to share our goodness. Sadly, we all know too well that we all have a nature that does not at first experience a connection with God, which would give us an assurance of abundance and eternal life and a conscious, consistent reach for connection. For at first, even in a healthy, supportive family, people typically experience times or circumstances that feel like scarcity and isolation. And so it seems to me that we've been created with an inner spiritual drive for connection that is not dependent on that childhood experience, that we have been given this desire to be connected and a need for attachment with another person, with our Creator, that feels then like abundance without limit, love for another who loves us. This inner way that we have been created with, this inner capacity, leads us to develop spiritually and so connect with God by mutual love. So Jairus models for us those thoughts and feelings and words and actions that when we, perhaps nobly, stick to our way of being and doing, even if it becomes at times selfish and worldly and isolating. I can discover and stand on a principle that keeps me honest and in society and making contributions to the world. And I can also become so attached to an idea or a feeling that I seemingly willingly destroy a relationship in defending it. So far as my respect for people's opinions or the law or my financial welfare allows me, I feel quite free to protect my way of being and my thoughts and my feelings. When Jesus does this, he is modeling a secure attachment with his God, and so an authentic sharing of wisdom and goodness with people. He was so well connected with God, like a son to his father, that he could channel life back into a seemingly dead body. Death becomes, therefore, a kind of spiritual sleep rather than the end of all being, which many people in the church then did believe. So now put yourself in Jairus' shoes. The shock of his daughter in the process of dying broke the grip the merely external and traditional ideas of his faith had on his mind. His mind was then free to consider a larger, deeper, even spiritual view of life. He had certainly heard and probably had seen and listened to Jesus in the past. And a new idea came to him. Certainly an influence happened to him, which awakened in him a hope of connecting with another human being, of trusting the power of love to heal. That is a belief that heals, as we've all experienced, I hope. In that moment, all of Jairus' prejudices were forgotten. He put off the dignity of his office to run to one who was a known threat to the synagogue and fall at his feet. He had to put off pride even to ask for help, because a part of him realized his thoughts and feelings had been twisted away from a connection with God. In what must have looked like a foolish casting aside of all that he was supposed to hold dear, he snubbed and discounted and disregarded his family and friends to seek out Jesus. I can imagine perhaps he started to delegate the task to go get Jesus, and either no one was willing or he realized he just could not ask another person to do what his own heart had become free to do in this moment of anguish. So he runs to Jesus, and what does Jesus do? Well, he was interrupted by healing the woman who had a flow of blood. But other than that, he immediately went with the man, thus affirming the man's faith without qualification. The man didn't have to do anything or prove anything. He simply came to Jesus saying, I believe you can help. Jesus also prevented a public spectacle. He told everybody in the street there to stay where they were, and he took only Peter, James, and John. And then when he got to the house, he didn't try to convince the crowd of wailing people that they were wrong somehow. They were simply living their religion. He didn't denigrate them or dismiss them. He did tell them, however, to go away out of the room, because he did the miracle in private. And then he commanded the Peter, James, and John and the parents into a code of silence about it. So that's what Jesus did. This all encourages me in my seeking trust in my higher power, in my God, in the source of love inside of me. In that search, I look at someone who is in distress, for instance, and not think only of their history or my past relationship with them. I will instead respond to their human distress. I will find joy and satisfaction in the good that I can do using my gifts and experience, trusting that the goodness of them, which is from God, is going to be effective and healing. I trust in that, and I seek that joy and satisfaction rather than in the affirmation I would get from those who see me do some good deed. The joy is the goodness, not me. Now, I will not need to criticize other people or dismiss them when I see their limitations or their ignorance or even their disorder. Rather, I will again first see people as human beings on a journey just as I am. God reaches me where I am, and love from the source is reaching them where they are. I do not save them. I do not add to their journey by correcting them from my limited and likely inadequate view of their life. And finally, whenever I experience the blessing of helping someone, that blessing does not come from the people who see it or from any public acknowledgement. The blessing is that quiet inner experience of being connected to the other person and to the source of goodness. So now back to the experience that Jairus represents. What happens to you when you realize you have believed a falsity? Surely that's happened to you. Or what happens to you when you discover that a feeling you're having, like probably anger or hatred or disdain, was misplaced? I experience that part of me knows only that this life is all there is, that there's nothing after death. This part of me is only connected to the earth. And when I make a mistake, when I realize I've done something wrong, that part believes that I am in some measure dead. For my mistaken belief or erroneous judgment has ruined my life, and there's no going back. Forgiveness does not exist in physics. This part of me knows only the physical world, and when that part of me is determining my life view, it will break under the weight of despair because it has no foundation, no source that would relieve it of that great weight. And I believe God, or the Creator, has given me another part, a living aspect of my life, which appears when my merely natural part is broken. This happens automatically because while the divine, the source, is omnipotent and omniscient, God has instilled freedom at the very core of my being, untouched by the impermanent nature of earth. Unbeknownst to me, this is pre-conscious, God has reached out to me with his inexorable love, which then frees me up to hear and respond to God's voice through that part of me that is now letting go of the merely earthly principles, which, no matter how noble, limit the depth of any relationship I may have. I am able to reach out to other people for a spiritual connection which then becomes the activity of my life. And this is how it's designed to happen. There's nothing I've done there other than noticing that there's this part of me that is broken. It's the spectacle, the imminent dying of a child, how devastating that is. Perhaps you've noticed, as I have, that we can have these childlike new ideas that and excitement about them and passion about them that regularly cool down. They get lost in the crowd of tasks and responsibilities, comfortable ways of thinking and feeling, the usual ways we go. We might leave a worship service or finish a book or be moved by a movie or a piece of music. And yet, normally, that energy that we got from it is lost more or less quickly. Deeply impactful and spiritual ideas and passions are the same thing. They can be threatened by this, as it were, unconscious and indescribable wasting disease, which takes their energy away. Some new desire will inevitably lose its strength, as it were, it falls asleep. It's still there, but it appears lost. And that's when we cry out for a remedy. We feel like we're losing our life. And we feel like we must be in action to save this source of our goodness and joy. It's interesting that these intertwined stories of the Gospel of Mark chapter 5 of the sick woman who touched him and then now this dying child model for us God's attention to us as individuals in any state of life. Jesus knew that a specific woman had touched him, and he immediately went to a specific ailing child. We're being told here that God's love is very specific and personal. God doesn't establish secure attachments with a group, right? Even a holy one committed to a life of perfect righteousness, right? All God's relationships are one-on-one. So when we discover that we cannot heal our relationships with other people or with God on our own using these merely natural skills, physical skills or physical principles, it makes sense that we at first bewail our loss of power. Human beings are developed, right? We first acquire a sense of self during our childhood. Then there is a phase of self-centeredness and selfishness before the formation of a spiritual self that then provides the ground in which the seed of this spiritual love can grow, the love for God and for others. A secure attachment is the achievement of a relationship of our adult, authentic self with another person, and especially with God, which is the completion of the goal of love, the continuance of the life of all that is created. Sometimes we notice we've lost our childhood, right? And that can be sad. The best example I have is when I went back to my house I grew up in and tried to climb the pine tree that I'd climbed up so many times as a kid, and now I was too big. I couldn't fit between the branches. I could see the path I used to take, the particular branches I would go through, and I was so sad that I couldn't climb that tree anymore. That's real. And at the same time, it's important to recognize that what we were relying on was merely natural, and that now we have an opportunity to rely on spiritual principles and spiritual values based on a love of other people and a love of God, and it's that love that heals us. Perhaps there's a part of us an old part is dead, but we are also created with a self that is love. Every human being has the capacity for this love, and so always has the ability to remember that they can have that love, and that hope for this connection spurs us on. And when we notice that something's not working in our life, that hope can become aware of it, can get our attention, just as Jairus in his grief open his mind to the idea that Jesus could help him. Certainly, too often, children are wounded, and their capacity for this hope is less than optimal. But the resilience of people who have had traumatic lives, their recovery and their discovery of authenticity and love is evidence for the existence of this fundamental nature of the human being created to be connected. So while there are times that we do not feel loving or wise or righteous or at peace, those very spiritual states have been implanted in us from our creation, awaiting our discovery. And that is when, in a sense, our Creator comes to us speaking in our own language. In the Gospel account here in Mark, which is written in Greek, the text changes to Aramaic, the language that people normally spoke, when Jesus says, "Little girl, wake up." I take this to be a powerful and tender witness to the immediate presence of God's unconditional love. And then we experience the deep, spiritual, joyful, satisfying, living connection with our God and with all other living creatures on the planet. That is the joy promised us from our creation. Do not be afraid, just have faith. I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.